All right, it is 6 p.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. Let the record reflect that all commissioners are present. And we will skip public discussion because we have no members of the public, which brings us to agenda item number 4, discussion regarding ex parte communication, conflicts of interest, and rezoning considerations.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So we're going to be going through a couple of topics from the bylaws and then also the law that governs planning and zoning commission meetings. A lot of this, some of this might be familiar from your onboarding, but, good to review. And you should have gotten memos in the agenda packets that went out. But it's a lot of information, so we'll take breaks for questions and feel free to pipe in at any time. Broken things up into 2 buckets. The first is just going to be prohibited and restricted contacts, so that's conflicts of interest, and then ex parte communications. Anne, if you don't mind. Okay, so conflicts of interest are kind of notoriously difficult to define. Broadly speaking, officers of governmental entities, which includes members of planning and zoning commissions, are required to avoid them. And it can be helpful just to focus on the basic purpose of the requirement, which is to avoid public officials needing to decide between their public duty and their private interests. So one of the ways that you can do this, particularly when we're talking about conflicts that are more of a gray area, is to ask yourself if you can be fair and impartial on an item that you're being asked to vote on. It's a broad concept that's often very fact-specific, and we do often at the city attorney's office issue informal opinions, address issues over email or by a more formal memo if somebody comes to us, whether from Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council or a different board or commission. So we're able to kind of talk a little bit more, let's say, about like the financial specifics. We really appreciate the service that people provide, and so we also acknowledge that there are a lot of personal and professional ties in the community, so we want to be able to kind of parse them on a very case-by-case basis and see when, a recusal is truly going to be necessary. The basis for this requirement is found in a number of different areas of the Iowa Code. Each goes to a little bit of different types of conflicts of interest. 362.5, that's going to address interest in public contracts, so contracts with the city. There's a good bit of case law, a good bit of attorney general opinions, and then of course we have the bylaws. Again, this is another one of the reasons that we would encourage you to reach out to the city attorney's office if you think you might be engaged in or facing a conflict of interest, because each of these sections includes a number of exceptions, a number of additional requirements, more than we want to get into tonight. So these, just to run through the examples that were in the memos quickly, these are very much a non-exclusive list, but some things that come up very frequently, both in the case law and that we see at the city. Examples of conflicts of interest would include, if a commission member has a direct or indirect financial interest in the outcome of a rezoning ordinance, which could be an interest in receiving future work on a development project or an existing business relationship with an applicant. In another case, that could be a commission member advocating for a vote based on their personal ties to a friend or family member who stands to gain financially from that vote. Another situation would be if a commission member demonstrates professional or personal interests that could influence their vote on an application before the commission. That could include seeking out additional information about a project or expressing an opinion on the application to others by attending developer meetings or other publicly hosted meetings. One of the things that we think about when we think about conflicts of interest is not just the legal component, but also kind of the impression that's given to the public. And we'd like to avoid, when at all possible, giving the impression of there being a dynamic where commission members, council members, any city officers are, speaking with members of the business community who might have a pending application. Another situation which gets a little bit to the fact of why these statutes can be complex is a commission member who is an employee of a firm who receives a public contract other than by competitive bid. That would be a conflict, but you see with the other but then by competitive bid, 362.5 gets very specific. So another reason that we would encourage you to come to us. And then lastly, and we know this comes up a lot in all different boards and commissions of the city, if a member serves on the board of a nonprofit applying for a rezoning and votes on that rezoning, that would be a conflict of interest, requiring the member to recuse themselves from that vote. So if a conflict does exist, or if you think you may have a conflict, let's say you know you have a conflict, the state codes requires that states that the appropriate course of action is to declare it and decline to vote. You get a little more specifics in the bylaws on that process, which is to state the reason for the conflict, leave the panel before the discussion begins, not participate in the discussion, and not return to the panel until after the vote. If you're uncertain as to whether this procedure is going to be necessary, I'm really hitting this note, but please reach out to the city attorney's office and we'll try and help you work through it and see if that's really necessary. You know, we don't want you to feel the need to recuse yourself if it's not actually necessary. And so that ties into ex parte communications. This type of communication could be a conflict, but isn't always. So it is subject to a less stringent approach if it exists. We just look for disclosure requirements. So an ex parte communication is a discussion of an agenda item outside of a public meeting with an interested party. As I said, not necessarily a conflict of interest, and we emphasize disclosure. And the basic purpose of this requirement is just ensuring that commission members gain access to all information on the basis of which they'll make their recommendation during the course of the public meeting, which is the same public meeting where members of the public get access to that same information at the same time. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. The legal basis for this is a little different. It's a lot more case law, and it gets into kind of a live area, which I will not make you all listen to, but there's a little bit of parsing between what bodies are considered quasi-judicial and what functions are considered quasi-judicial as opposed to legislative. And that matters because quasi-judicial functions or bodies are subject to due process requirements, which are more stringent requirements for what needs to occur at those proceedings. And then legislative bodies like city council are subject to less stringent requirements. Now, at least in Iowa case law, there hasn't been any decisions saying one way or the other whether planning and zoning commissions count, entirely as one or the other. They engage in both quasi-judicial and legislative functions. Because of that, we rely on the bylaws, which just maintains a general disclosure requirement for ex parte communications, regardless of parsing between the type of item that might be under consideration by the commission. So some examples, these are a little bit easier than the conflicts of interest. If an applicant calls a commission member and to advocate for why a rezoning would be a good idea, if a neighbor to a property under consideration runs into a commission member at Hy-Vee and says that they think the rezoning is a bad idea. And then this one is a little more complicated because it is an example of what could be both an ex parte communication and a conflict, depending on the specifics going on there. But if a commission member were to attend a good neighbor meeting or a meeting hosted by a developer to learn more information about a project for which a rezoning application has been submitted prior to the presentation of that item at a public hearing, that could be just ex parte, or if the commission member has a financial or business interest in the project, which was the reason for seeking out that additional information, that would then be a conflict as well. So the steps here would be to reveal the contact prior to the presentation of the staff report. So that's prior to when we handle it at the public hearing. Naming the other party and sharing specifics of the contact. If it's an email or another form of writing, share copies. If it's verbal, a synopsis. And if you have any questions, again, reach out to the city attorney's office or to staff. So before moving on to the second section, does anybody have any questions on those two pieces? All right. So this next section goes to rezoning applications. When evaluating an application, we hear this, each time we're at these meetings and hearing a rezoning, but you're looking at, members are instructed to consider two criteria: consistency with the comprehensive plan and compatibility with the existing neighborhood. This comes from both the city ordinance and state statute that gives power to the planning and zoning commissions. And so some of the reasons that this is important and why we want to emphasize it is that the question at hand is really what the application is for, what the rezoning what rezoning is being asked. So it's not an opportunity to achieve a general policy goal, to express a personal preference about a neighborhood amenity, to express dissatisfaction with the present zoning code requirements and what changes could be better, any objections to the identity of the applicant. All of that should not be factors going into the decision on which the vote is going to be made. And it's easy to sort of kind of get out of that. So the thing I think that we really want to emphasize remembering is just that you are looking at the very specific application in front of you. You're being asked to look at those two criteria and then to form a recommendation around that specific question. So given that the categories are broad, we encourage you to look at the comprehensive plan again. There are a number of land use goals in there that can be informative about what does it really mean to consider, whether it aligns with the comprehensive plan. But by and large, we encourage focusing in a limited way on the question at hand under the application.
Can I ask a question about permissible considerations?
Yeah.
So I think one thing that comes up pretty frequently that we run into are details of a particular site plan.
Mm-hmm.
So like you have the rezoning petition itself, but then often you have some underlying plan to build a building of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it permissible for us to be thinking about like the design and appearance of that building, or should we just be thinking about the appropriate use for that property and whether, whatever RS5 or RS12 or a particular zone is appropriate for that plot?
So that's something where it would be, you really want to cabin that to the appropriateness of the zoning designation. You don't know what will go on after that particular project. It's hard because, a lot of people have industry experience, but the specifics of the aesthetics or the site plan construction doesn't go to the zoning question. That is, before you when you're being asked to zone and whether the rezoning and that change in the zoning designation is appropriate.
So if we were looking at like a rezoning petition related to an apartment building or something like that, for example, we would really like kind of trying to ask whether that plot of land is appropriate in general for an apartment building,
Yeah.
not whether a particular building is designed a certain way or like we like the aesthetics.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I have another kind of question similar, but the general policy goals, it says that's an inappropriate consideration, but the comprehensive plan, is it like inherently general policy goals? So how are you supposed to establish consistency with the comprehensive plan without talking about general policy goals? There's really no specifics in the comp plan other than the land use map that I can tell.
That's a good question, and I think, I could have phrased that a little better. When, with that, I was going a little bit more to situations like affordable housing or open space. Many of us have opinions about what a neighborhood should look like or what we want to see in our communities. And so when you think about a policy goal that may be about promoting affordable housing, but that doesn't tie in specifically to a need created by the application at hand, it might not be it is not an appropriate consideration for whether or not the rezoning should go through. And so that was more what I was speaking to in terms of policy goals. the policy goals contained within the comprehensive plan would still, of course, be appropriate to consider. And again, we would encourage the review of the land use goals in there.
Yeah, I struggle with that one still. I just don't know, what we're allowed to ask at this point, It seems very, very broad to just not talk about, specifics of the comp plan, if there's, I think that the city recommendations focus on, usually a sentence or two within the comp plan in terms of their recommendations. So, and generally disregard other sections. So you're not allowed to kind of ask or question, other sections of the comp plan. I don't know.
If I could jump in, Alex,
Yeah,
on
go
this,
ahead.
I think kind of to piggyback off what Alex was saying about affordable housing and open space, to maybe take that a little bit further and get a little bit more specific, is if you're proposed a rezoning that is, is going to be a market rate, multifamily residential, you can't say, well, I don't support this because it doesn't include affordable housing. That would not be an appropriate consideration and something you should not incorporate into your vote. Or back to kind of Chair Quellhorst's question about the design. Maybe you don't think they're providing enough open space. Maybe you see a design and you think there needs to be more open space. Well, again, the question is this multifamily zone an appropriate zoning designation based on all the policies in the comprehensive plan, but saying, I have issues with this or don't support the rezoning because I think you should be dedicating more open space. That would not be necessarily an appropriate consideration.
Well, even though the comprehensive plan continually references, open space, and, connection to parks and other things like that. I mean, it's so prevalent in the comprehensive plan, it's hard to just ignore unless I'm missing something.
Well, the other thing is we have neighborhood open space requirements, we have on-site open space requirements. So if the issue is that those specific standards, that should be discussed outside the rezoning.
Yeah, so is the issue kind of that it would be appropriate to consider those things in the comprehensive plan insofar as they would be affected by a zoning change, but not by a particular project, if that makes sense. So if the comprehensive plan generally advances suitable open space in neighborhoods, then we might look at a proposed rezoning and say, well, this zoning classification allows for very minimal or requires very minimal open space. And so given that, we think that might be problematic in this neighborhood. But what we wouldn't want to do is look at a particular project and say the way this is oriented doesn't allow enough space on the plot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
Is
don't
that kind of the
know.
distinction?
Maybe, I don't know, Alex, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's how I would see it too. It's less just saying, oh, the comprehensive plan contains these values and we're looking at this and maybe this project doesn't exactly adhere to all of our goals there, but more, like you said, tailored to the specifics of that application and the way that it shows up under that specific zoning designation or that specific site plan.
So a lot of the things that Commissioner Davies is referencing are things that it might make sense to consider, but
Yeah, right.
we want to try to focus on the actual rezoning rather than the particular project.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
One more clarification on that.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to picture a scenario where it is appropriate to challenge a particular proposal based on a general policy goal in the comprehensive plan. So one thought that came to mind is, say there's a project that is getting or is asking for an exception to what's just standard in the whatever zone it is already in, and it through a PUD or something, I don't know, OPD, sorry. And if if that exception they're asking for, like, is in conflict with stated goals in the comp plan, that would be appropriate, right? To like voice, like, we don't feel like, or I don't feel like that's appropriate because of, it's in conflict with, and if you just didn't have that exception, you would be able to comply with the rest of the base underlying zoning or something?
I think that would be like an appropriate topic for discussion to raise, to say, you know, I'm seeing this issue here, but then we have these countervailing considerations that would make us perhaps want to, you know, proceed with recommending, voting in favor of the application. But that would be an example of, yeah, an appropriate topic for discussion.
Yeah, thanks.
Definitely art, not science.
Okay, question. The elephant in the room, affordable housing. You
Yeah.
say we don't mention that when we start talking about rezoning. But I'm looking at the big units out on Riverside and Myrtle, where they tore down all of those affordable units and built this huge unit now that is with no affordable units in it. So would it not have been appropriate for us to question why there weren't any units that were affordable in that complex?
Sorry, if I can just jump in real quick.
yeah.
That project did require affordable units because it's in our riverfront crossings district.
Are there
So-
actually,
So they either
Affordable
they had
units?
to meet our affordable housing requirements, which is either provide them on site or pay a fee in lieu.
so they paid a fee in lieu?
I don't remember.
I don't believe there are any affordable units in that whole conglomerate. And we all know that Iowa City needs more affordable units. And the way the new comprehensive plan is set up, we talk about mixed-use land. Is that correct? So because it says mixed use, does that mean some of that should be affordable when it's zoned?
Well, we're still working on the comprehensive plan update, but mixed use generally means a mix of land uses, so not
Residential and
residential and
commercial
commercial.
and-
Yeah, but has nothing to do with market rate or not market rate housing.
So is it not our concern to have housing that is affordable in this area, and how do we address that? Or do we not, are we not concerned about it?
You know, we have affordable housing requirements at the time. We already have existing policies regarding housing affordability. We have an affordable housing annexation policy, which requires affordable units or a fee in lieu, and we have something similar in our riverfront crossings district. So I think, you know, going back to what Alex was saying about if you're considering a rezoning, the question really is more about, is a multifamily zone appropriate in this area? Not is it market rate or is it income restricted?
So we shouldn't be concerned.
I don't, Alex, do you have anything to add on that?
It's definitely not a blanket statement that we should never be discussing that. It's just, you know, being mindful about whether it's, and this is going to get in a little bit to the next topic, but whether it's tied to a need directly created by the rezoning, whether it's something that is specific to the changes made by the rezoning. But what we want to be mindful about is that not using any rezoning application as an opportunity to advocate any general policy goal when it is not connected to the specifics of that rezoning application.
Okay.
Maybe with that, we'll move on to the conditions then.
Yeah, so these are tied a little bit to the considerations when reviewing a rezoning application as well. The standard here from Iowa Code Section 414.5 states that commission members may recommend conditions to council as part of a rezoning if the conditions are reasonable and imposed to satisfy public needs which are directly caused by the requested change. So it's a similar way of thinking about what is appropriate, what is an inappropriate condition. This is an area where federal law is changing very quickly, and very much cabining what municipalities are able to do in terms of imposing conditions. So we want to be particularly cautious about making sure we're confident that we're tying that public need, that we are indicating that the public need is directly caused by the requested change.
The conditions that I remember or come to mind are usually screening. And sometimes it seems to me like it's for more of a community screening, and sometimes it's been for a private individual screening. Both of those are okay? Both of those requests are okay?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. In my and in the limited times that I have seen that, yes, that would be absolutely an appropriate condition.
Okay.
Because in those cases, we're requesting that additional condition because of the proposed project is like creating this condition that needs to be screened.
Right. Like they're bringing in more lighting that wasn't there before, and now there's a single family home that's going to have 24/7 lighting. If you raise the screening, they'll be blocking that.
Right, okay.
Or like, for example, if we have one plot that's relatively low density that we're going to change to a medium or high density, then it might make sense to require like screening to visually separate that from like an RS5 zone. Right.
Right.
But
Yes.
if you're going from like a zone of one density to another zone of equivalent density, then that wouldn't be a reasonable justification to require that screening.
Yes. Yeah, I would
Okay.
agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Anne, if you don't mind going to the next slide, we've got a little more there. So yeah, this gets into the, a fee contributing to a general fund for a particularly city initiative. That's something where there's case law limiting the ability to do that. Any addition of public amenities not linked to a need created by a rezoning. So, thinking, wouldn't it be nice to have a playground here, open space, park? That's not going to be something that we can use a condition to impose. And getting back to the affordable housing point, if the need is directly caused by the requested change, absolutely, that is a conversation to be had. Whether that condition can be opposed, and I believe has been in the past, it just depends on the tie there.
Can you define a need created by the rezoning? I'm thinking specifically just because all of these things seem very specific to things that have recently come up. Where an area, a school was, previously zoned for public use and it was rezoned to private use. And I think questions were brought up about public access to open space and other amenities. So it seems like that might be kind of directed at that. Is that not a need created by that rezoning? Or, I'm having a hard time sort of defining that need created by a rezoning language.
That's something that courts have been increasingly restrictive on, such that there's one case that went up to the Supreme Court where they were looking at a development, got rid of a trail, like a bike trail, so that they weren't able to have the same connection. And it was argued that, we need to bring this back because this, that you got rid of this public space, we need to have the public space. And they found that it didn't rise to that level. That's something where, to get more into that, I could prepare something on that actual case law, because there are a lot of very specific definitions that depend on the type of rezoning, the type of condition. I think in the case of something like a public space no longer being public, we wouldn't see that. I think directly causes something to see as a little bit more targeted and minute, as in the screening example, and less so changes in the neighborhood that might shift public amenities towards private amenities.
Okay. I mean, just in specifics of the case law, I mean, I think it's just interesting to note, you know, how many specific references of trails and trail connections and the important in maintaining those in all developments exist in our specific comp plan. So it seems like in a lot of ways it's in conflict, you know, case law versus the comp plan. So just trying to reconcile those and understand, you know, what we're trying to advocate for or ask about in terms of a rezoning. We're obviously not well versed in case law, but we're familiar with the comp plan. I don't have a specific question. I just find it interesting.
Well, and what you're very much noticing is that this is all case law coming out in like 2024 and 2025, and a lot of changes that are tied to larger political shifts. So the comp plan and some of the ways that, you know, these priorities have been articulated are changing a little bit. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we are catching up enough that we don't find ourselves following pattern and practice and then stumbling into a situation that didn't used to be a problem but is now more restrictive and could be one.
So I'm also kind of trying to understand when a rezoning could give rise to a public need. So would that be like, just by way of example, like let's say you have an area that's like RS5 and we decide that we want to increase density to, you know, a medium or high density area. Like in that circumstance, it would, like maybe it would be reasonable to require a sidewalk because then you have like a lot more foot traffic. Is that like sort of the situation that you're envisioning?
Yes, yeah, that type of very particular, yeah.
But maybe it wouldn't be reasonable to try to impose like a sidewalk or a trail as a condition if you're like keeping density the same, for example, or moving from high density to low density. I mean, I know it'll depend on the facts of the case, but I'm just kind of trying to understand like generally
Yeah.
what we should be thinking about.
And I think with that, it would be, you know, yes, a sidewalk, but maybe no, not an opportunity to say, okay, we're changing the density. Does that mean we need a park, you know, or more open space? Sidewalk, you can make a little bit more of an argument about, you know, meeting the transit needs, the pedestrian needs. But if you're using it as an opportunity to say, oh, now the topography of the area is changing and how can we meet that, that might be too broad.
Okay, thank you.
Are you concerned that the second one there, the fee contributing to a general fund, would restrict the city from like requiring affordable housing or like doing the fee in lieu for affordable housing?
There's that particular ordinance is safe under the case law. There's just other situations in which if you're trying to create a fund, say to the one instance in which this happened was a general fund for parks that were not at all tied to their districts, and they were just charging, you know, they were imposing conditions on any applicant to contribute to that, and that was a situation where that was found to be unrelated to a direct need.
You wouldn't happen to have, just like off the top of your head, any other examples of like when a condition didn't have a sufficient access to a change triggered by rezoning, would you? I mean, for me at least, it's just like kind of complicated and abstract, and so I'm just trying to get any specific examples that I might be able to.
And I'm not sure if there are more that you've seen since you've been here longer in terms of specific examples.
That are not appropriate?
Yeah, I'm thinking like more in terms of case law. You know, like if there are other instances where there's been a condition imposed is part of rezoning, and a court found that there wasn't a reasonable justification for the condition.
There have been others where there's a lot that happen both in California, South Carolina on beaches. And you'll see, an attempt to allow an easement for the public because somebody is seeking the opportunity to build at a higher density along a stretch of beach. And that was something that courts said was not directly caused by the requested change, even though it seems like it is, because this greater density was decreasing public access to the beach, but that they still couldn't require that easement as a condition because the ability, it was a lot of parsing basically that the development did not actually change access to the beach. It was just visibility of the beach, but the public still could be enterprising and have the same access. So it can get as finely parsed as that.
Okay, thank you.
I guess one other maybe quick question, but there's conditions, and then I think there's there's language in there too that the commission can recommend modifications, which I think don't come up very often, but they seem somewhat related to conditions. Is there any specifics about what we can suggest for modification, if it made it potentially more compliant with the comp plan, or more, in sort of the other condition that we're supposed to factor in, like just more compatible with the existing, yeah.
Yeah, that I would say is something we need to be less cautious about. Conditions, it's cautious because we're saying you're not going to get this, we're not going to approve this application without, or at least our recommendation to council is not to approve without XYZ that we're asking for. Whereas a modification, as a body, Planning and Zoning Commission is making these recommendations. So it's a lot more tied into just the process to make that recommended modification.
And can you clarify what you mean by modification?
I'm just kind of thinking generally. I mean, like if there's small, the comp plan mentions, connections. I keep going back to that connection, to existing parks and things like that. If you can suggest modifications that are pretty minimal to a development that would make it more compatible with the neighborhood surrounding it or with the comp plan, I don't see, it seems like planning and zoning is a good opportunity to interject those modifications rather than letting it go too far in the process where modifying, would put you back at, step one, and it takes obviously several weeks to months to get through other steps.
And so are you talking about a rezoning that, like a plan development overlay rezoning that has a site
Yeah.
plan associated with it, or a subdivision? Because some rezonings come to you with no specific development proposal.
Yeah, I guess it would mostly come up in an LPD or some other specific, where there's a specific plan attached to it. Maybe no question there, just generally curious.
I am, just to that, I think, to add to my comment, I think that's something where keeping in mind the sort of umbrella intent is to evaluate the application at hand and not to make recommendations to the applicant about how they could improve. That's sort of outside the purview of what's being asked to do.
I guess we're still being asked to evaluate whether it's compatible to the comprehensive plan, and I think compatibility, just inherently comes with various degrees of compatibility. So it could be compatible with a sentence or two, but, you know, largely ignoring other aspects of the comp plan. I think that's where I struggle with, you know, some specific developments that have come through recently.
I think, so I mean, do I understand correctly that the big issue is really like whether the zoning is compatible with the comp plan? So it'd be like, if an area is proposed to be rezoned to, is it zoning classification that would allow for like high-density housing, then the question is whether high-density housing in that particular area is consistent with all of the objectives advanced by the comp plan. So that would be things like adequate open space and good transportation and trails and so forth. But the question would be kind of focused on that zoning change, not whether like the project itself advances those objectives in the comprehensive plan.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, focusing on the zoning change, not the project, and then also ensuring that the comments are tied to the comprehensive plan. So not just, oh, here's an idea I have based on an opinion or industry experience, but I looked at the comprehensive plan and I'm recommending this, or this is modifications I'm suggesting based on the fact that I think it would be more compliant with the comprehensive plan.
Got it. So, like, just by way of example, like, we might look at something and say, the comprehensive plan prioritizes adequate open space in neighborhoods. This is being proposed for a rezoning that would result in high-density housing. And maybe we're not comfortable with that because that wouldn't allow sufficient open space in the neighborhood. But in contrast, what we wouldn't want to do is like look at that site plan and say, well, we think that high-density housing is appropriate here, but the way that this is drawn does not have sufficient open space.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so yeah, just the takeaways from each of these is going back to the conflict of interest. Members should recuse themselves from discussion and voting on an item where they have one. If you are not sure if you have a conflict of interest, please reach out, and we are very happy to talk through the specifics of that with you and hopefully find a way where recusal either isn't necessary or guide you through that process. In terms of ex parte communications, those should be disclosed prior to the presentation of the staff report. When assessing a rezoning application, focusing on the application at hand, and when recommending conditions, ensuring that they comply with the statutory criteria that we went over, and in particular, the creation of a direct need. And then again, if you have any questions, contacting the city attorney's office or staff to talk it through.
So I got a brief question. So are these the constraints for the Planning and Zoning Commission? And then when it goes through like city council, they are not bound by these same considerations? Because sometimes you watch the city council and how things transpire there and then kind of keep track of like where the momentum is going and such. So just getting clarification on that.
Yeah, the guidance is a little different just because city council is an exclusively legislative body, and so the standards are a little bit different to which they're held. It's going to be pretty similar in terms of conflicts of interest and ex parte communications, what they're going to be asked, but a lot of the particulars of the way we're being asked to treat applications and conditions imposed have to do with the way that the legal status that this commission has as opposed to city council.
Any final questions for staff or the city attorney?
I'm still toying with some things, and aren't we supposed to be kind of a screening committee on zoning? Shouldn't the hard questions be asked here so they have the answers when it goes to city council?
To make the recommendation, yeah.
Okay. So some of these things that we're talking about, if they're not brought up, I mean, we're not the ones that make the final decisions, but we are the ones that make the recommendation
Right.
to city council on how we think it looks. So it feels like with some of these restrictions, we're now being restrained from asking even the simple questions, even though they may not change what's being proposed.
Yeah, I hear that. I think it's just a matter of saying, I'm being asked X question, I'm allowed to consider A, B, and C, as opposed to A, B, C, D, E, and F. So we're still expecting, a very thorough discussion, a very thoughtful recommendation. It's just that within the power that is given legislatively to create the Planning and Zoning Commission and what they are being asked to do in terms of the process of how things move through this commission onto council. It's cabined. It's not just that you can consider or talk about any broad question or any broad criteria. There's some limitations there.
Yeah, but from past cases, as we may have agreed on a rezoning or a plan, and then when you look at the final project, it's nothing at all like what we thought it was going to be. So how do we, as a commission, make sure what we propose, what we agree on, or what we send to city council is what's going to be the final project? How do we get closer to that happening?
Well, yeah, so I think that's a really excellent point, is kind of one of the main reasons, as I understand it, to focus on the actual rezoning petition itself, because we don't really know what the final project is going to look like, right? I mean, they can present a particular project plan with a building of a certain appearance or oriented a certain way, but ultimately, if a rezoning goes through, then they're no longer constrained or beholden to a particular project plan, right? I mean, at that point, you have like a city building code and other legislative provisions that would guide the project, but our determination really only guides that broad, like, zoning classification.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that true even in the case of like a OPD, where there's a site plan?
OPDs are different.
So that would, because that's.
They
always
are
tied-
constrained.
Constrained to what
Yeah.
they present to this
Yeah.
board or
Right.
commission.
But like Orchard Street was an example of that, where Orchard Street came in with a building and project on it. That failed at city council. The project or developer got disconnected from it, and the property owner resubmitted for rezoning, and the rezoning went through. So, we run into situations like that where maybe kind of it gets detailed enough to a proposed project, which might not be the ultimate outcome, and then once that project got disconnected from it, then it went through without an issue. Similar, as we're talking about this, I was thinking about the Happy Hollow Park, the Barkalow development north of that. We talked a lot about the trail connectivity on that one, and connected to Happy Hollow and tree removal and items such as that. So my understanding, based on one of the takeaways, that connectivity to the community, which has some different factors because it really didn't gain additional access, but that would really be outside of our purview, right, for the zoning moving forward, because it's beyond the scope of really the city requirements. Is that right? Or would that still be considered from connectivity? And then like the tree removal, you could, talk about some of the other items related to the comp plan, but maybe not directly related. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess what I'd say to that is through the process that staff had with the applicant, we discussed trail connections. And there were a lot of concerns with potential routes, like routes to the west, to the bus, routes to the south, to the park. There's issues with topography, making it ADA accessible. A route to the south would result in more tree removal. Like, we had all of these conversations with the applicant, and we thought the best path forward was connecting it with the sidewalk, building a sidewalk and connecting it to the park. So staff explored those, and I think if that was an OPD. And if, we were working with the applicant to look at those possibilities, and we ultimately determined they weren't feasible. So that was more, it was like lack of feasibility more than lack of ability to incorporate those in that project.
Right. And I know that was discussed, but, so, without that background ahead of time necessarily, I mean, that could have been discussed with staff, but like once we don't get into that level of details as far as what's already been vetted out. So is that something we would just like ask during the staff questioning, and then staff would share that insight?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
It's still an appropriate question.
I don't see a problem with asking the question. I think, yeah.
No, yeah, and I think that was something you and I had talked about, just that staff has access to certain information that it, from their conversations, that doesn't necessarily always get written in the report, so it can be helpful to check in.
Seems like just those conversations should happen in a public setting rather than a private meeting between city staff and developers. I think, reasonability or viability is a tricky thing. I think making sure developments like that adhere to the comp plan more comprehensively is important. I don't know. I think it's important to ask those questions. It seems like we're being told not to ask broad general policy questions, which I still struggle with. So I don't know.
I think, I mean, if I understand, Alex, what you were saying correctly, it's really just focusing on how the actual rezoning is impacting those comp plan considerations. Because if you analogize to like a house, if you were to zone something RS5, then you're saying this is suitable for a single family home, but you wouldn't, start making determinations about like the degree of open space, for example, in somebody's backyard, because that's ultimately governed by the building code, right? So it's kind of the focus on whether RS5 and single family home is appropriate in a certain area, but then once you get there, at that point, we kind of defer to the building code and other regulations to make sure that the criteria set out in the comprehensive plan are protected and advanced.
Yeah.
That's some, that's like a straightforward rezoning, but there are frequently PUD overlays in a lot of the things which do get into the specifics. So that's where I'm struggling of like, I don't know, don't ask questions, but don't make, it seems weird to me.
Aren't you saying you can ask the staff questions?
Yeah, I mean, questions can be asked at the meeting. I think part of this is to help you further understand what you should be considering when you make the vote, what you should be considering if you're adding conditions, and really thinking about, is that rezoning creating that direct public need that's causing you to recommend the condition. I mean, like Alex said, this is an art, not a science. But also, like Alex said, you don't have the world. You're limited.
Yeah, it's definitely, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and I think what Commissioner Townsend mentioned is really important, because I mean, we can dig into a plan and ask questions and really like it and approve for rezoning, but then there's no guarantee that the project would actually take the shape of that plan. I mean, it could be vastly different within the contours of the building code.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's just, questions absolutely encourage just what is the universe in which we are discussing, and what is the ultimate goal that we are moving towards with those questions.
So I think then, like, just to kind of summarize and for me to wrap my head around this, I mean, the question is the rezoning appropriate, not is the project itself appropriate?
Yes, yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. You clearly put a lot of work into this. It was a very thoughtful and very concise presentation, so thank you very much for putting this together.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know a lot of it is broad and fact specific, so definitely feel free to reach out to Ann or to me or City Attorney's Office going forward.
All right. Well, unless we have any final questions for staff or the city attorney, that takes us to agenda item number 5, which is consideration of the meeting minutes from the November 5th meeting. Do we have a motion on the minutes?
Move to approve?
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously and the minutes are approved. Which takes us to item number 6, planning and zoning information.
Well, tonight is,
I think that was kind of
the chair's last, sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I guess a lot of the meeting was planning and zoning information, so I just didn't know if you had anything further.
Sorry, I do have more. Tonight is, the chair's last night with the commission, so we have just a certificate of appreciation. As Alex, started her presentation with, we do really value your guys' service. This is not an easy job, so thank you very much for being part of the commission.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and thank you all. Yeah, I really appreciate what everybody does. I mean, everyone on the commission has just been wonderful to work with, and staff are just, you guys are consistently great and prepared and thoughtful and do a wonderful job of answering our questions. So, thank you so much, and you've just been great to work with.
Best wishes as with your move and everything.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much.
That's all I have.
All right.
Will your position just be vacant, just understanding what happens after? Is that
The
appropriate to
deadline
ask
for
now?
applications is December 3rd, so there should be a new commissioner appointed at the December 9th city council meeting.
Okay.
So for the next meeting, we may not have a 7th person, but we hopefully will the second meeting in December.
And is Maggie the chair then?
That'll be on the next agenda.
Okay, got it.
but-
Do you anticipate
Maggie?
there will be one on whatever you just said? the
Oh,
first
just, I think it's I think the next meeting is the 3rd. Is that right?
That's what
Yeah.
I have done. Yeah.
Yeah, we might have an item that night.
You ready? To lead it?
All right. Well, unless there's any further P&Z information, that takes us to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned.